The other day, I was looking around Reddit to see if Nintendo ever got around to fixing the stick drift on their Joy-Con controllers, and while I was trying to figure it out, I came across a post that absolutely made my blood boil. About a year ago, a user had put together a really helpful post kind of summarizing all the Joy-Con issues, complete with receipts, and they titled it, "Nintendo President Apologized for Drift, Promised Improvements, Won the Lawsuits, and Are Still Selling Defective Controllers." And this is a great post, because not only did it spike my blood pressure, but it also laid out all the facts about Joy-Con drift in a very clear and concise way. And a quick side note here, if you own a Nintendo Switch and you've never heard of Joy-Con drift or you've never experienced it for yourself, you are incredibly lucky. Joy-Con drift is like trying to play your favorite game, and imagine your little brother's grabbing your controller and he's yanking it all over the place, and no matter how much you ask him to stop, he just won't listen to you, and you start sweating and screaming and hitting. And yeah, over the years, there have been multiple polls done that show that this issue, Joy-Con drift, affects somewhere in the ballpark of 40 to 60% of Switch owners. That is a tragic statistic. Half of the Switch owners that took those surveys said they ran into significant issues just trying to play their video games. Maybe you're one of those fans that experienced stick drift. I know I certainly am. I've personally packed up and mailed off 3 different sets of Joy-Con to Nintendo for repairs, and 2 of them pretty much came back drifting immediately. Joy-Con, you had one job to do. So yeah, I'm not exactly surprised there's been outrage on this topic. Nintendo absolutely deserved to get memed on for releasing such shoddy controllers. And memed on they got. We've got memes like this one and this one. Ooh, I really like this one. And we've even got comics. But the one that stuck with me the most, by far, hands down, is that some beautiful person on the internet went above and beyond to create this.
You know what DK stands for?
Donkey Kong?
Drift King.
Drill. What do you mean, drill?
Still need a dictionary?
On a related note, I was actually curious to find the patient zero of Joy-Con drift, the person who foretold all that was to come, but yeah, my Google skills were not enough to get me there. That said, what I did discover, and what I found almost just as interesting, is that there were actually articles floating around calling out Joy-Con drift and hardware issues before the console ever even launched. Weeks before consoles ever touched store shelves, you had outlets like Polygon telling people their pre-release units were being affected by all sorts of weird controller issues. But despite that, despite the warnings, March 3rd, 2017 came and went, and the Nintendo Switch launched. It promptly sold a bazillion units, and here comes a shocked Pikachu, but to nobody's surprise, media outlets, fans, gamers, pretty quickly started to notice there were some funky issues with these controllers. Now, obviously, Nintendo did not like those headlines. And in fact, they tried really hard to get in front of that backlash. Not even a full month after the launch of the Nintendo Switch, they were already putting out articles and reports saying that it was a manufacturing issue. It was a manufacturing issue. And the problem was totally fixed. It was totally corrected. A manufacturing issue? Really?
You sure about that? You sure about that? You sure about that?
And when their quick declared victory didn't exactly work out for them and people continued to report they were experiencing Joy-Con issues, their troubleshooting advice was hilarious. There were actually articles floating around that were instructing people to move their Nintendo Switches away from their microwaves and their aquariums. No wonder I'm getting all this interference on my Switch. I've got to move it away from my microwaves and my aquariums and my cell towers built on top of an Indian burial ground. And look, I get it. I'm poking a little fun at Nintendo's snafu here. That said, I think anybody who's even remotely reasonable understands that hardware issues, design issues, these can happen to even the most prepared company. Mess ups are going to happen. These things are designed by overworked and underpaid human beings. But I would argue it's actually what the company does next that's important. It's how they respond to those issues that's actually worth talking about. And that's what today's episode is actually about. Not that Nintendo designed a flawed controller. No. But when the media and the fans told them loud and clear that there were problems, they denied them, they minimized how widespread they were, they played cat and mouse with their repair programs around the world, and more than 5 years later, they've yet to keep their promise and release a compelling fix. So on today's episode, let's talk about it. Let's discuss the timeline of events, other similar hardware debacles in the gaming industry, and most crucially, Nintendo's response to all of this. And going into this, I want you to temper your expectations.
If you think this has a happy ending, you haven't been paying attention.
My name is Clyde, and welcome to the second episode of Nintendo is Not Your Friend. This is our series where we pull back the curtain on some of the company's biggest failures, really how it's affecting their fans, and this is all couched in the lead up to the company's next console. If you missed episode 1 and you aren't subscribed yet, please consider hitting the button. Blah, blah, blah. You know all that jazz. Let's get into it. Actually, no. No. Before we get started, I don't know how I want to say this. Last week, when I posted my first video on Wednesday, it got like 17 views that first day, and I went to sleep that night thinking that was going to be the end of the story. I genuinely made a post on the community tab thanking people for 50 views across my intro video and my first video. When I woke up the next day and I saw that it had gotten like 500 views overnight, it genuinely blew my mind. And the thing that blew my mind the most was just the kind, warm comments. As a very, very small YouTuber, as a brand new YouTube channel, it meant a lot to me. So before I get back to dunking on Nintendo, I just want to take a moment, a sincere moment, and just say thank you. This is a topic that I care so much about because I grew up playing Nintendo games. I and my friends and family have continued to love Nintendo games into our adulthood. And I make these videos because I hope to one day inspire people to be more open to have these kinds of conversations. And it just means a lot that people are tuning in and watching and leaving comments on a channel with 69 subs.
Nice.
So I guess what I'm trying to say is just thank you. Thank you for saying hi in the comments, for being a friend, for being a part of that conversation. All right, that's enough of the mushy stuff. Let's get back to the microwaves and the aquariums. So picking up where we left off in the intro, it's March 2017. It's a different time. The Nintendo Switch has just been released to the masses, and like we said, media outlets, reviewers, certainly gamers, many of them are starting to notice some funky things going on with their controllers. But hey, we didn't know how bad this whole Joy-Con drift thing was really gonna get. Those first few months were a blur. We were all enjoying our favorite games. Breath of the Wild, Mario Kart, ARMS. Wait, was that just me? Anyway, months turned into years. Great games came and went, banger after banger, and many people were enjoying having a ton of fun on their Nintendo Switches. And yet, all the while, quietly in the background, murmurs and whispers of Joy-Con issues continued to crop up every now and then. The issue was clearly not just going to go away, at least not with a software fix. And let's just say Nintendo's strategy up until this point had been less than ideal.
My name is Jeff Goldblum.
And I'm Rachel Bloom.
We want to welcome you to Choices 2020.
Question for everyone.
How much is your company spending to stop stick drift?
That's a question.
Yeah, and what's the answer?
Look over there!
Where? Oh, that's a good one.
Nintendo.
I've never seen that device used on the
Confusion.
debate stage before.
Media outlets and fans were on their heels, so Nintendo had to say something. And they finally did. It took Nintendo 2 years to finally acknowledge there was a broader issue going on with their controllers. I'm going to repeat that because it's kind of an insane timeline. 2 years! And I'm not talking about 2 years to like engineer a hardware revision or design some anti-drift technology. I'm talking about the amount of time it took them to hit send on a tweet or issue a basic statement, or really anything acknowledging there's a bigger, broader hardware failure here at play. And I'm not going to harp on this, but 2 years is kind of a long time to not say anything. You know what 2 years of zero communication does to confused and impatient gamers? It warps their mind. They go stir crazy. Case in point, the Silk Song subreddit. Boom! Oh, I made myself sad. No, but seriously, in the 2 years that Nintendo decided to not say anything, fans got creative, and I mean really creative, in trying to fix stick drift themselves. Don't fact check me on this, but I think there are more videos on the internet of people trying to fix stick drift than there are of Bully Maguire. And I love me some Bully Maguire, but I am not kidding you when I say there is a whole ecosystem of stick drift fix videos on YouTube. I have seen some wild shit on YouTube of people trying to fix their Joy-Con stick drift. Everything from people like jamming pencil erasers in their Joy-Cons to blow dryers, magnets, and clasps. Vibration therapy? What even is vibration therapy? ChatGPT even seems to think that some people have been dunking their Joy-Cons in saltwater cleanses to try and fix Joy-Con drift. But I gotta say, the most insane fix I saw, and I shit you not, was someone on Reddit claimed they had fixed their Joy-Con drift by lubing up their fingers with butter. Croissants were brought into the room. Buttered croissants. Yeah, I'm making them Australian. Don't judge my accent. I don't like them because they get my fingers greasy. And I don't like greasy Joy-Cons. But my friend, however, did. I watched as he picked up 2 buttered croissants and ate them. His fingers glistened in the dim light. He picked up the Joy-Cons without wiping his hands first. I nearly passed out. I held back tears. I had the urge to rip the controller right out of his hands, but didn't due to kindness and a lot of social anxiety. I saw $80 go down the drain. Then he did it again, and again, and again. After the night was over, I picked up the grease-covered, butter-smelling, shiny Joy-Con and put it into my bag. Once I got in the car, I reached into the glove compartment and pulled out like 20 paper napkins and got busy. Once I had finished, I connected them to the console, turned it on, making sure they didn't feel slimy. They were fixed. So thanks to my friend and his buttered croissant eating, my Joy-Con drift issue was resolved. The end, shrimp on the bar. In this situation, all the fixes that people have desperately tried to come up with is a direct result of Nintendo's silence on this issue. Fans have had to come up with something, anything, to just try and fix their busted controllers, and the internet just kind of ran with it. Which is why when articles started popping up in July of 2019 that Nintendo would finally start offering repairs for Joy-Cons in select markets, people understandably took that as a good sign. Many fans, myself included, saw that as like kind of the first baby step in Nintendo taking the issue seriously. Maybe this was their start of them taking accountability. No. The timing of this goodwill Nintendo repair service could not be any more telling. And that's because all this goodwill from Nintendo didn't come out of nowhere. It's because they were slapped with multiple class action lawsuits. But it's this lawsuit in particular, filed by CSK&D in July of that same year, that I'd really like to focus on. First up, they put out the feelers very early on in their process, asking general consumers that own Switches if they had experienced Joy-Con drift. And unsurprisingly, their inbox got destroyed. 24 hours later, 5,000 replies later, they had a pretty unambiguous answer. And second, and very important, is that when the Nintendo Switch Lite came out later that year, CSK&D didn't miss a beat. They just straight up added it to their lawsuit. People that were buying these brand new devices with the Joy-Cons literally attached were saying they were seeing the same kind of stick drift. Only now they couldn't swap out the Joy-Cons when they were totally borked. All this is to say is that in late 2019, when Nintendo decided to hit the green button and launch the Nintendo Switch Lite out into the world, they had been told multiple times, probably hundreds of times, by not just the media, by their fans, by multiple class action lawsuits, there were problems with their controllers, and they knew it. And the response that we got, the response that was finally goaded out of Nintendo by all these lawsuits, was pathetic. It was the bare minimum they could have possibly given us. This is, of course, in addition to their previous non-comment on the Joy-Con drift issue, which reads as some of the most uninspired corporate speak you're ever gonna hear. At Nintendo, we take great pride in creating quality products, and we are continuously making improvements to them. We are aware of recent reports that some Joy-Con controllers are not responding correctly. We want our consumers to have fun with Nintendo Switch, and if anything falls short of this goal, we encourage them to stop using their microwaves. And I'm not going to make a meal out of this, but if I go to a sandwich shop and you give me a sandwich and literally half of it is pickles, I wouldn't say there's some pickles on my sandwich. I would say you gave me a pickle sandwich with some shit. But maybe that's just me being pedantic. Anyway, I think most of us know how those lawsuits went. They either all quietly settled in the background or they were dismissed, and yet somehow Nintendo kind of walked away from this whole situation unscathed. And fun fact, if you've ever doubted that the American legal system was a dystopian hellscape, keep in mind that multiple lawsuits hinged on the question as to whether or not children, literal children, were eligible to sue companies like Nintendo. What is this timeline? When Microsoft released the Xbox 360 back in 2005, users encountered an issue that was bricking consoles called the Red Ring of Death. And you want to know what Microsoft did? They spent more than $1 billion repairing affected units, extending warranties, and actually designing and implementing a fix. They even released a whole-ass documentary about this problem. And don't get me wrong, I'm not saying Microsoft's handling of this issue was perfect. It wasn't. It absolutely wasn't fast enough, it wasn't transparent enough, and gamers were justified in their anger and frustration at the situation. It took them a long time to make things right. But even still, it's worth acknowledging this response from Microsoft is infinitely better than anything we are ever going to get or are likely to get from Nintendo on Joy-Con drift. And look, I understand there's some loyal, optimistic fans out there that want to look at Nintendo's repair program and point to that and say, hey, look, Nintendo is doing the right thing here. They're repairing the Joy-Cons. What more do you want? But it's worth stressing that even that wasn't a perfect solution, if you can even call it a solution in the first place, and it wasn't exactly easy getting there. In fact, it wasn't until just last year that in the UK, Switzerland, and many other European countries that the same grace and courtesy was extended. Users in those countries reported being asked to provide proof of purchase for consoles they had bought 5 or 6 years ago? In 2021 alone, a European consumer organization reported receiving 25,000 complaints against Nintendo for Joy-Con drift. That is a lot of consumers being told, hey, pay for the repairs yourself or just buy new Joy-Cons. And now that I think about it, that strategy seems vaguely familiar.
Same question.
Microsoft?
Question.
What?
Look over there.
Where? She keeps fooling me with that look over there business.
And all this frustration about controllers, their repair program, it just begs the question, why doesn't Nintendo just fix it? It's not like we're waiting on some future technology here. You've got devices out there like the Hori SplitPad Pro that have way lower drift rates than Joy-Cons. And we've seen many custom installs of Hall effect sensors, Hall effect joysticks that put this issue to bed. So why doesn't Nintendo do it, right? Like, if modders on Etsy can accomplish this goal, why can't Nintendo release a Joy-Con in 2024 that doesn't develop stick drift? And I think we all know the answer to that question. It may not be a very happy thing to talk about. It may be even more than a little frustrating. But the truth is, the reality is, it costs Nintendo less money for them to stick their head in the sand and wait the problem out than it does for them to engineer a fix and release it to the mass market. Look over there has been working out very well for them for the last 7 years. You really think they're going to change course right before launching a new console? And please, don't get me wrong here. I'm not even saying it's necessarily worth it for Nintendo to open that can of worms right now. I mean, I can only imagine the backlash from consumers that would happen if Nintendo actually released a Joy-Con that didn't drift, right? Like, every person with a pair of drifting controllers would go, yo, why did I spend $70 on this when Nintendo knew it was defective? Nintendo doesn't want to kick off that conversation, and they definitely don't want to foot the bill. And when I look at the situation like that, from the business perspective, it does make a little sense. But the consumer in me, the Nintendo fan in me, is beyond disappointed that they promised to do better, gave untold numbers of customers the runaround on repairs, and then promptly fucked off the moment the lawsuits were dismissed. Looping back to the Reddit thread that kicked off this episode, I think it's incredibly disheartening that the top comment on that post was just a blanket, just the latest reminder that video game companies are not your friends. And a general reminder that companies are never your friends. Also, shout out to this guy who wrote, I appreciate all these reminders that I have no friends. But yeah, it sucks. It sucks that we're all collectively so cynical that companies are open to change, that we're so quick to just throw up our hands in apathy. This is why I make these videos. Not because I want to paint Nintendo as some enemy of the industry or of consumers, but because I want to challenge fans and really challenge myself to hold them accountable when they screw up. Anyway, the final point of this video and the shortest topic we're going to cover today is, what does all of this imply for Nintendo's next console? Honestly, not a whole lot. I'm not here to doom post. I'm not here to tell you Nintendo's next console is definitely going to have stick drift and oh my gosh, because honestly their track record is pretty good. But what this situation does tell us is that if there are hardware issues, which I hope there aren't, but if there are, we could be years away from Nintendo acknowledging them, let alone fixing them. It really just comes down to whether or not Nintendo thinks it's financially viable for them to fix things. And I don't know about you, but I'm going to do everything in my power to get ready for any potential stick drift that might come my way. You know what they say? Fool me once with busted $70 controllers, shame on you. But fool me twice, shame on me. That's why on launch night of the next console, I'm coming prepared with this bad boy. Blow dryer? Check. Pencils? Check. Magnets, tinfoil, and saltwater cleanse? Good to go. Hell, we've even got a buttery croissant in there if all else fails. Nothing is gonna stop me from enjoying that sweet, sweet sequel to ARMS. That's still coming, right? Look, on the spectrum of responsibility, I don't need or even want a feature-length documentary about Joy-Con drift. I really don't. I just think we as fans, as consumers, deserve a little bit better than look over there. And until they decide to actually take some accountability here or release a hardware fix or just stand up and say, hey, we're not willing to foot the bill to create one, then Joy-Con drift will just continue to remain one more reason as to why Nintendo is not your friend. But if you'd like to be a friend of the channel and you enjoyed episode 2, please consider subscribing. It goes without saying, but I am an incredibly small channel, and I genuinely can't tell you just how much the kind comments and messages from other Nintendo fans, how much this keeps me going. And yeah, that's a wrap for today's topic. Next week, we're going to be back with a video on Nintendo's pricing models, particularly in some of the not nice things they've done in that handover from the Wii U to the Switch era. It's going to be another spicy one, so I do hope you'll join us for it. Last thing I want to say before I close this out is if you're in the comments section and you see something you disagree with, all I ask is that you exercise patience and empathy with your fellow gamers. At the end of the day, we all just want a great gaming experience, and while some of us feel differently about Nintendo as a company right now, we're all just gamers trying to have fun. So please, no friendly fire. Please. All right, thank you so much for watching. Really appreciate y'all. Have a wonderful weekend ahead, and see y'all next week.